Welcome to another episode. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, a residential loan officer and real estate investor based out of New England. And today I have another solo episode for you where we're going to deep dive into how to qualify for a mortgage and how certain decisions on paying off debt can influence what you qualify for. Hope you enjoy listening and take something away from the show. If you've listened to previous episodes, I've talked a bit about mortgage qualification and what goes into it. But today I really wanted to get tactical and deep dive into some actual numbers to give you a feel for how we actually approve someone for a loan and how we determine how much they actually qualify for. So there's really, three main components that go into financing in the traditional realm. So traditional meaning, you're going to buy your first house, going to buy your first multifamily, you're going to live in it, you want to put 5% down. That type of financing typically qualifies off of the debt to income approach. So we basically look at your gross monthly income, we take a percentage of your income, and that amount that's left over is the maximum amount that we're able to have outstanding in monthly payment obligations. And then we can back into how much of a mortgage payment you have available based on your debt to income. But with that, it's important to know that there's quite a few different programs. So each program, when it comes to mortgage financing, provides different flexibilities on the main criteria of lending. So your income, your debt to income, assets, and your down payment. So how much money are you putting down? How much money do you make? What's your credit score? And ultimately, what's the use for the property? But each of these different programs has different flexibilities for you. So in general, most programs use a debt to income ratio maximum of 50%. So let's walk through some numbers and see what that looks like. So let's say you make $10,000 a month, make $120,000 a year on a salary. Ultimately, how we're going to determine what you qualify for is based on that gross monthly income figure. Now, obviously, if your job has different components like overtime, commission, maybe you have some bonuses, you're self-employed, those have nuances as to how we look at it. But let's start with the streamlined example of you make $10,000 a month as a salary. Now, $10,000 a month is going to be your gross income. Ultimately, like I said, 50% of that income is what we're able to use for you to qualify. In general, some programs might stop at 45%. Other programs might push to 55%. So it depends on what program you're utilizing and ultimately figuring out what that ratio will be. But let's say it's 50%. Obviously, 50% of $10,000 is $5,000 a month. So $5,000 a month is the most amount of monthly payment obligations that you can have outstanding. And when I say that, I mean, this includes things on your credit report. So car loans, student loans, credit card minimums, car leases, personal loans. We're not accounting for your Netflix subscription or your life insurance policy. We're really only concerned with things that you're debt obligated to that show up on your credit report. Any other debt obligations you have, co-signing for someone on a lease, for example, for an apartment, those types of things that you're contractually obligated to repay, not something you can voluntarily cancel per se. We're looking at those types of obligations. So you make $10,000 a month. We can use half. That's $5,000 a month in available monthly debts. But let's say you already have some debts. Let's say you have a $500 a month car payment. Let's say you also have another $125 a month in student loans. And let's say you have $375 a month in credit card minimums. So we subtract those out of the $5,000 you have available, and you have $4,000 a month left in qualifying income. So essentially, that $4,000 that's left is the most amount you can have for a total mortgage payment. So we can then figure out how much does $4,000 a month get you in terms of a mortgage. And ultimately, of course, there's a lot of different factors that go into it. So I'm going to use some very ballpark numbers in order to figure this out. But obviously, talk with the loan officer to get the exact details because it could be very different depending on your profile, as the interest rates, of course, can influence this. Mortgage insurance, taxes, home insurance, if it's a condo, HOA fees. So There's a lot of things that can impact this number, but just to give you a general ballpark of where you probably would be, $4,000 a month in terms of a mortgage probably puts you somewhere in the $500,000 to $525,000 mortgage range. So that's just your mortgage. But keep in mind, you'll probably have a down payment. So let's say you have $50,000 to put down. Based on these numbers, we just said you can probably get around $500,000 to $525,000 on a mortgage. Plus, now you have your $50,000 in down payment we can add on top. So you'll get to a $550,000, $575,000 price. But this is why it's really important to know your budget first, because a lot of times people don't want to spend 50% of their gross income. Just because you make $10,000 a month doesn't mean you want a $5,000 a month mortgage payment. So starting with the budget lets us back into what price point ultimately you'll fall in based on where you want to be monthly. So really important to have that budget narrowed down because we're able to back into what you would qualify for and what price point you'd want to be at to stay within what you can afford. And that's a big differentiator to make. What you can comfortably afford and what I can qualify you for are more often than not two different things. So know your budget. That can get you a good idea on where you can be in terms of a mortgage, in terms of a price point. And then from there, you can talk with your realtor and say, all right, based on my budget of X, I'm probably going to be within this price point, 400 to say 450,000, whatever those numbers are. Then based on where you're looking, your realtor can say, well, here's probably what you're looking at for a property type. Maybe you're looking at a condo in some markets because the single families are too expensive. Or maybe you're looking at an older home or in this square footage. Or maybe you can only get a 2-bedroom house instead of a 3 or 4 because of the price point. So that way you can start to really figure out if what you're looking for is plausible within your monthly budget. So really important to find that budget first. But now what I want to do is flip this script into a multifamily property. Because when it comes to multifamily property, we're able to use some of the rental income to help you qualify for a larger mortgage amount. And I want to show you just the impact that owning a multifamily can have on your monthly payment obligations, because that's super important. A lot of people think about multifamily as the end game for cash flow. Buy an asset. So you buy a 3-family property, you move in, you live in a unit, you can put low money down, and eventually you move out and collect some extra rental income in your pocket. Of course, that's the ideal outcome. What a lot of people don't talk about is the cost savings while you're getting there. And a lot of times when you buy multifamily and live in a unit, it reduces your monthly payment obligation after rent to almost nothing. So you're collecting rent to offset your mortgage payment. So you're living for a lot cheaper than you would have if you just went out and bought a single family or condo without that rental income coming in. So to give you an example, let's use the same numbers we just talked about. You make $10,000 a month. You're like, look, I want to buy a 3-family. Well, 3-family, assuming you're going to live in one unit, allows you to put 3.5% to 5% down. We can now use the other 2 units rental income to help you qualify. So let's say each unit gets $2,000 a month. So there's 2 other units. We have $4,000 a month that we can now include in your income. However, we're only going to be able to use 75% of that income. We account for some vacancy factors within how much we're going to give you credit for. So if your units are getting $2,000 each for the other 2, you have $4,000 a month extra in income, and we can use 75% of that. That's another $3,000 we're adding to your income. So $3,000 added to your income now puts you at $13,000 a month because we're able to use that extra income. And that extra $3,000 a month is going to generate another almost $200,000 in buying power. So now instead of being capped at 500 or 525, now your numbers are 700 or 725. But here's where it's even more impactful. Let's look at what would your monthly payment obligation be if you collected that rental income. So assuming you get to a $700,000 mortgage, right? We just took your income, we added in some rental income from the units to help you qualify for more. Now you're at $700,000 in price. But let's look at what happens to the mortgage payment when accounting for those rents. And we'll compare it to the example of you buying a $500,000 single family house that we just went through. So $700,000 in a mortgage, again, very rough numbers, but let's say that's about $5,200 a month in mortgage. Your old payment was about $4,000 a month. On the previous example of you buying a single family house for $500,000, your payment was $4,000 a month. Because we can now use the rental income, we're able to get you into a higher payment, which means a higher price point. So now you're looking at a $700,000 three-family property. And the payments, again, ballpark, probably $5,200 a month. So you're like, Ryan, why would I want a higher payment? I don't want that. But you're collecting rental income. Under this example, we just assumed you're getting $2,000 a month for the other two units in the building. So if your mortgage payment's $5,200 a month and you're getting $4,000, all you have to pay is the difference, plus utilities, of course. But that means your net payment obligation is only $1,200 a month, but now you own a $700,000 or $750,000 asset. So that's where the multifamily gets really beneficial because it reduces your payment obligation in the short term. And then once you move out of the property, now instead of paying $1,200, you're collecting $800, $900, $1,000 a month, whatever those numbers shake out to be. So that's the power of real estate, the power of multifamily. Not only does it reduce your payment obligation in the short term, but it helps you qualify for more, and it can present cash flow opportunities for you when you move out and you're now able to rent out the unit that you were living in. Not to mention, that mortgage payment of $5,200, you're not really paying the mortgage. And you are, but you're basically offloading or outsourcing that mortgage payment responsibility to your tenants. So in theory, if your property didn't go up in value at all, in 30 years, you'd have a $700,000 asset free and clear. But of course, we know real estate appreciates over time. So that property in 30 years is likely going to be worth a lot more than $700,000. But what it costs you to get that is super important too, because the benefit of moving into the property yourself is you get to put little to no money down. So you can buy a multifamily property, even $700,000 for 3.5% or 5% down. So let's say you do that. $700,000 three-family, like, Ryan, this sounds great. I'm all over it. You can put 5% down as an example. That's $35,000. Plus you have closing costs. Let's say your closing costs are $15,000. They're probably a little bit less, but just to give you a ballpark here for some round numbers, that's $50,000 total in funds. And that $50,000 is not only going to generate you monthly income from the cash flow later, but it's going to almost automatically turn into $700,000 plus in 30 years when the mortgage is paid off. And that's assuming the property doesn't appreciate, which we haven't seen in the last few decades of real estate. So something just to think about there, not to mention the tax benefits. Of course, there's tax benefits to owning real estate as well, which we can dive into that at another point, but you'll save quite a bit in taxes as well by owning the asset. So hopefully that gave you a better understanding of how we qualify for mortgages. Of course, there's a lot of nuances. The payments that I gave, the debt to income ratios I gave can be much different for your scenario, but this is what I do every day. So I'm happy to, have a conversation if you want to learn more about it. But as you can see, the difference between buying a single family house and buying a multifamily is so much different in terms of your payment obligation, whether it's an investment or really a liability in the short term. Are you paying money to own it or are you making money to own it? Those are two different things. But ultimately where it gets really impactful is when you start to multiply this. So under that example of buying a $700,000 three family, let's say when you move out, you now cash flow $1,000 a month, right? You move out of your unit, you collect rental income for your unit, which now pays the mortgage and gives you an extra $1,000 a month. Let's say you do that 2 or 3 years in a row. So every year you buy a new property, gives you another $1,000, $1,500 a month. Well, after 2 or 3 properties, you're going to have $3,000 to $4,500 or even more, depending on how the numbers shake out, coming your way in positive cash flow, which then becomes your income to pay the mortgage on that single family house you wanted in the beginning. So if you can see the long-term vision of real estate and understand it is going to take a few years to get there, it's a long-term game, but these game plans are fairly simple. They're fairly concrete. Buy a multifamily, you live in a unit, you move out, collect the rental income, buy another one, collect some more rental income, and use that rental income to pay for your mortgage on your dream house. And then 30 years down the line, you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however many properties you buy, free and clear, paid off by your tenants, and give you an excellent retirement account. So not to mention the cash flow and tax benefits along the way. So as you can tell, I'm very bullish on multifamily. Obviously, it's what I do for a living, but hopefully you can see some of the power and impact that it can have on changing not only your financial future, but creating generational wealth for your family. As always, thank you for listening to another episode. I hope you found today's information valuable. If you have questions about your specific scenario or want to learn more about the mortgage process or about how to get qualified to buy your next property, reach out to me. You can find me, my info in the show link below. And as always, if you enjoy what you're listening to today, please leave the show a like, comment, and review.